Thanks so much. Thank you, everyone. Brilliant. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today in your lunch hour, or for some of you who are on the East Coast of America, Quentin, at your breakfast time. So welcome. My name is Susie Giles. I am one of the co-chairs of the ESG expert panel for the CIPR. The panel we brought together last year in discussions with the CIPR. And the panel is made up of a group of us who are communications professionals who work directly in the area of ESG. Now, that is either in-house inside an organization or in consultancies or in a freelance capacity, but all of us have direct experience of working in communications in ESG. And so this is the very first of 4 events which we've got planned over the next few months. So thank you for joining our inaugural event. There's a few things that we'll be bringing out to you. As well as the events, we'll also be putting together some skills guides, which will give some tips and tricks and some best practice on the different areas of ESG and communications. So really great to see you all. Thank you so much. As you can see, it is being recorded today. And also I'll just take you through, I'll start to share my slides because I'd like to take you through the agenda for today and how we're going to spend our time together. So brilliant to see you all. First of all, today's event is really to give everybody a grounding and some of the basics behind what is ESG. So we are expecting that some of you may have a fairly good understanding of this, but may want to find out a little bit more clarification. Some of you may also not really have an idea yet. And you're here definitely to find out more of what this is about. So hopefully you'll be able to take away some learnings from this session. Do remember, this session is worth 5 CPD points. And if you're anything like me and you're still logging your CPD points ahead of the deadline tomorrow, then rush to get this one in there. We've got approximately an hour, and it is being recorded. And what we'd like to ask you is, as we go through the session, please use the chat to put questions in. I'm going to monitor that. And please put questions in during the session, and we can answer those as we go, as they come up as relevant. But we have also put aside some time at the end for specific questions and answers of our panel. So as I said, this is the first of 4 sessions we've got planned, so lots more to come. So thanks for joining us. So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to my fellow panelists, Deborah and James, to ask them to briefly introduce themselves. And today we're going to spend some time explaining ESG and the context for organizations, and also the implications for communicators. And then we're really pleased today that we are being joined by Graham, who is going to give us a real life example of his work leading sustainability strategy in Nationwide. And we're going to have a conversation with Graham to understand what it really means to effectively apply that strategy in practice. And then, as I said, we're going to have some time for Q&As. So I'm then now going to ask if Deborah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Deborah Binksmore. I was head of corporate affairs, brand marketing and ESG at Puma Energy, which is a privately held oil company, midstream and downstream, operating in markets such as across Asia Pacific, LATAM, and mainly Africa, which obviously have very different ESG challenges from some of the markets that we might be more used to working in. And I'm delighted to be here today to help build and share our understanding of this important topic. Susie, can we just put the slides on slideshow so that people can actually see the text?
Yes,
super,
absolutely.
Thanks.
Are they on slide? Yeah, cool, wonderful. And I just want to double check that everyone can actually access the chat. Oh, cool, thank you.
Susie, we're still not seeing them in presentation mode. We're seeing all your notes with them.
Oh, that is strange. Okay, apologies. Let me just stop sharing a moment and let me reshare. Thank you for letting me know. I couldn't actually see those comments. Cool. Okay. That is strange. Okay.
So while we're doing that, does James want to say a few words about introduce himself?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm
sorry,
James
yes.
Rowlands.
Sorry, I just got the technical. James, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course, I'm James Rowlands, Senior Policy and Public Affairs Manager at Nationwide Building Society. Find out a bit more about Nationwide and our work around ESG and sustainability in particular later when I have a chat with Graham. But my role is focuses around our work and particularly our political engagement on everything ESG related, with that particular focus on our core business area of housing and green homes and the related ESG issues.
Wonderful. Thank you, James. And has Graham joined us?
Yes.
Graham, would you like to introduce yourself?
I do. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. So I'm Graham Lloyd. I'm Director of Strategy and Sustainability at Nationwide. As James says, you'll find out a little bit more about Nationwide later on today. But we very deliberately at Nationwide bring strategy and sustainability together because we kind of see them as one and the same. And we'll touch on a little bit why later on. But thank you very much for the introduction and the invite today.
Thank you, Graham. Can I just check the slide showing correctly yet?
We're not seeing them. You're not showing.
Okay. Hang on a moment. I do apologise. Let me just reshare. Okay. Are you seeing them now?
Yeah, but still with the notes. You need to move into presentation format, I think.
I do apologise. I was, these were absolutely fine a minute ago, sorry. Example of me having used Teams for the past year and a half and got out of the habit of sharing. Let me just get... Liam, if you're still there, are you able to share them instead of me? Maybe you might be able to make it work.
Yeah, I can do it. I'm happy to do that. If you were to share again, there's a button on the bottom right-hand side, which should enable full screen mode. We can try that once more. If that doesn't work, then I'm very happy to. So if you see on the bottom bar there, there's this kind of,
looks like a pull down screen.
It looked like a projector screen.
Yeah, so if you try that.
That should work.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yay, we got it. Sorry about that, guys. Right. So let's not delay you anymore. Please, Deborah, would you like to kick us off?
So thanks, Susie. That's one of the trials of switching from Teams to Zoom and everything else in between is you forget which buttons do what. So this is a bit of a definition of what is ESG. And actually, interestingly, we asked ChatGPT to help us with this. And this is what it told us, which actually, when we discussed it and shared it in our panel last week, we thought this was quite a good definition. I won't read it. I think you can all read it through yourselves, but perhaps to just set some context, once considered a pretty niche market for big global companies, ESG is very much now in the mainstream, and many smaller companies, privately held companies, are thinking about this very hard as well. It's I think we've lost the slides, but I'll let you guys fiddle around the background. But it's best to think about ESG as a framework that helps all stakeholders to understand how an organization is managing both risks and opportunities related to things, in the environment, the social side of business, and the governance, the way in which the business is operated. And it's important from many perspectives. So firstly, it provides stakeholders and investors with an ability to direct the capital to investments that are aligned strategically to sustainable activities, and investors' own principles and values, which are moving much more into this space. So last year, there was around about $2.5 trillion held in global sustainable assets. So this is becoming a big ticket item. Companies, both public and privately held, need to cater for that, for the demands of shareholders who are increasingly focused on the impact of companies from an environment, social and governance perspective. Inside the business, this is also impacting through regulatory changes, funding requirements, ratings requirements, and the need of a business to respond strategically to the commercial drivers of reality external to the business. And they're key factors for companies to manage. It's about doing good business as well as reporting and compliance. It also addresses the need for companies to understand externalities to the business, because that's part of how you maintain your license to operate. And this is becoming more essential. You can't just have a sustainable performance without actually having the social license in which to operate your business. And then another dimension of it is it's very supportive of the key stakeholder relationships with customers, employees, the communities in which business operates, and therefore it's critical for private businesses and publicly listed businesses to put in place a genuine ESG narrative that explains their purpose and their mission, their vision and values, and is supported by the right measurements and evaluations. So I think two key points I would make here are businesses have to think really hard about that purpose and mission and align that to their business model. And I think we're going to hear more about that later from Graham and probably in the Q&A. And they also have to think hard about where they make trade-offs for investment. Is that more in environmental? Is that more in social? Because, solving problems for multiple stakeholder dimensions is very hard. And then the point I want to really bring home is from a communications perspective, it's actually catalyzing better reputation management. It's bringing in good practice from corporate affairs and communications to the center of business and strategy. And this is a really good thing for us. We shouldn't be scared to explore and learn so that we can help the business create a meaningful narrative, because we are really close to the stakeholders' world and we can listen to that changing dialogue and help companies respond to it. So can I have the next slide, please, Susie? I'm just going to now walk you through some examples of what we mean when we talk about E, the environmental dynamics, and S, the social. And then I'm going to hand over to James, who's going to talk about the governance side of it. So a major part of ESG growth has come from attention on the environmental component. And that's probably what most of us first think about when we hear the words ESG. And it's particularly driven by responses to climate change. And it addresses the impact of a business on the physical environment and the risks from that to the company, to its suppliers and partners and customers, for example, from climate-related events or other environmental risks and issues. It includes things like the energy a company takes in, the waste it discharges, the resources it needs, and the consequences for humanity as a result. So things like carbon emissions, energy usage, greenhouse gas emissions, whether that's carbon dioxide or methane, air pollution from non-greenhouse gases such as NOx and SOx from car exhausts and particulates, water, wastewater management and the impact that has on water utilization of businesses, recycling and contamination, waste and hazardous material management, if you think about nickel and lead and lithium from batteries or manufacturing processes, circularity, so the whole life cycle of products and materials from design to manufacture to shipping to the use. And if you think about the fashion industry, then, to recycling and reuse and repair and laundering, and so on and so forth. So there are some industries that face very significant challenges in this domain, the extractive industries being one. Oil and gas is, and mining to some extent too, is more exposed to risk from environmental challenges than any other industry. And climate change is a really important sort of pressing priority for those companies. And pollution there comes from leaks or the disposal of products, chemical disposal and combustion, both in the marine environment and the terrestrial environment. And so you'll see companies like Anglo American, BHP, Glencore, Newmont, Shell, Equinor, Exxon, Chevron, all focusing really hard on this. Also, the automotive industry, because there are concerns around pollution and the consumption of natural resources, and the transition to electric mobility will be a big governance challenge for some of those companies to manage, as well as the social challenge. So you see companies like BMW, Tesla, Volkswagen, tire companies like Continental, Bosch, who are dealing, in the supply chain. They've all got a big focus on ESG. And also companies like the insurance industry, because global warming is changing, for example, flood risk calculations, and therefore increasing claims. And so the insurance industry has got to adapt and flex how it's going to survive from a business perspective in a changing environment. So if I could have the next slide, please, Susie. So the social criteria, they address largely the relationships a company has and the reputation it fosters with people and institutions in the communities where it does business, because every company operates within a broad and diverse base in society. So it generally addresses social impact and risks from societal actions for employees, the customers, and the people living in the communities in which it operates. It covers things like labour practices, health and safety and security, community engagement, diversity and inclusion, the local economic contribution that businesses can make, education, and also the attributes of the products or the services that it offers. So if you think about some of the industries that are highly impacted by that, for example, FMCG companies, they have very wide-reaching supply chains and many, many stakeholders through that. Health and safety and human rights issues can occur at their supplier sites. And that can be very damaging and difficult or unethical for the brand image. Also, if you think about things like consumer data, companies need to protect that, as personal data breaches are also a human rights issue that damage consumer trust and put consumers at risk of cyber attacks and so on. So companies like Unilever, Danone and Nestle, you'll see them paying huge attention to what is happening in this particular area, and also fashion industry too. So with that in mind, I'll pass over to James, who's going to help us explore some of the more dynamic governance dimensions of this.
James, just before you crack on, Susie, would you be able to stop sharing the screen, and I'm going to give it a go on my end, because I think a few people are still having some issues with it.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you go ahead, Liam. Thanks.
Okay, right. So hopefully you guys should be able to see this now.
Yeah.
Just so I know, what slide were you just on then, before you're about to hand over?
Keep going. We need to move to that one.
Governance, this one here.
Governance.
We're still seeing it in presenter mode though, with the next slide showing on the right as well as the current slide.
Okay, cool. I'll work on that whilst you crack on, James.
Sure. No problem. So reach the G of ESG. So this is the governance principles, and this is effectively about being a well-run business. And these criteria look at things like the timing and quality of decision making, governance structures, and distribution of rights and responsibilities across different stakeholder groups. with the aim of having that positive societal impact and mitigating risk. So this can apply to areas such as business ethics and compliance, data security, capital allocations, and all those issues that make sure your decision-making structures represent customers effectively and represent the groups a business is working with. I think when you think governance and governance challenges, I think the go-to example is Enron. Everyone could see there that there were huge failings in their governance processes, which ultimately led to the collapse of the business. But we have other examples like the emissions testing scandal at Volkswagen, where the business practices sort of covered up those changes and led to significant business and reputational problems as a result. Also, I think going forward, we'll see governance challenges, particularly in the energy and extractive industries. So how they align the need to bring about the change related to the environmental aspect of ESG over the coming years, which will have fundamental impacts on their business models, how they'll be able to meet those net zero objectives while retaining scale and shifting their businesses over time to satisfy those sustainability driven stakeholders, providing the business returns they need to and continuing to support their customers. Increasingly good governance is rewarding the businesses that practice it, and I think particularly as you see that shift in generations, more millennial customers, more younger customers, they're actually really concerned about some of these governance issues more so than previous generations might have been. And as a business, you can have to have those good governance structures in place to continue to attract customers, to work with stakeholders, but also probably in the future attract the skilled employees that are needed to deliver that workforce of the future.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. That's great. What I was going to say was, as we move on to the next piece, actually, and you can stop sharing, because actually we don't need the slides for the conversation with Graham, which is great. So apologies for the technical difficulties. We'll sort this out by the time we get to our next event. So thank you for that summary, which I think is really useful to just set the context and make sure everyone is just familiar with some of the terminology around ESG, which is obviously, as you've all gathered, you already probably are well aware of, it is a complex, a multi-dimensional area that we're working in. So, don't be surprised to find that, maybe your own organization or organizations you've worked with are finding it a challenge to get their head around what ESG means for them. So what we'd love to do now, though, is hand over to James and Graham to find out more about how you address this within Nationwide. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Susie. Graham, thanks for joining us today and taking the time to speak to the group. And I know we've worked closely on environmental issues recently. So can you tell us a bit about Nationwide and how what we'd refer to as ESG today has been something that's been present throughout our organisation's history, and the social purpose that's been there since the Building Society was founded?
Okay, cool. Thank you. And thanks once again. So Nationwide is a building society. We're predominantly, we are UK based, and we are owned by our members. So that's people who have current accounts, savings, and mortgages with us, which does actually put us in a really unique position versus some of our competitors. Because of our setup, because of how we owned, we do think very differently. We have a long-term focus on decisions. We listen to our members a lot. We go up and down the country using our branches, using talkbacks to listen to what they need. And our mutual structure does give us advantages. So, we don't lend or invest in businesses that have a negative impact on society and the environment, such as those in fossil fuels or anything else. And there are some very, very recent examples, particularly in banking, where ESG, has really kind of come to real life if you don't get it right. We saw Credit Suisse fall over a couple of weeks ago, and I'd probably argue that was because of a governance failing. And similar with Silicon Valley Bank in the US, again, we focus very much on E and S when it comes to ES and G, but the G quite often is the one that does lead to some quite critical failings. Now, Nationwide is, I'll never say we're kind of 100% immune, because I'm not sure anyone can say that, but what I can say when it comes to someone like Nationwide, because of our long-term focus, because of our low risk appetite, because we're here day to day to see what our members want and demand, that's quite an important factor in ESG, and has stood us really well in terms of what we do and support our members over the last 150 years that Nationwide has existed.
Thanks, Graham. And I know there's some great examples of that social purpose. Have there been some recent examples where we've Nationwide's been able to demonstrate that social purpose and really do some good things around ESG?
Yes, so we have, we listen to our members, we look at how they interact with us. And one thing they've said is they like using our branches. They like them being on their high street. They like the interaction. They like to know that they're there in times of need. And we committed last year to essentially, we will not leave any town or city that we're in the next, until at least 2024. Now, Nationwide, I read an article just before coming onto this session that said Nationwide is going to end up with the largest branch network in the UK by September 2023, because what you're seeing across our peer groups is they are cutting hundreds of branches, in some cases every single year. Now, we have to close some branches at Nationwide, but we do that in very small amounts, because sometimes the roof might be leaking, or the door might, there may be some health and safety issues with it. But fundamentally, we are committed to a branch network because we've listened to our members and what they want. When it comes to the kind of E, and James, I know you've been very involved in this. So our hometown is Swindon, and we're very proud of our impact on that community. And we committed a number of years ago to building on a brownfield site 239 high quality, affordable, sustainable homes for that community. And we are in the kind of final part of that building process, and have actually got them out for sale now. That is a really good way for us to demonstrate to the wider sector how you can build affordable, environmentally friendly homes, and hopefully provide a bit of a green print. So there's lots and lots of examples of things like that that are done based on kind of environmental and social drivers that we just naturally think about, I think, James, day to day at Nationwide.
That's great. And more broadly, you mentioned earlier that you're Director of Strategy and Sustainability, and that there's a clear link between the two, and they can't be separated. From your point of view, what's going well in terms of embedding ESG within our strategy, and what still needs to be improved?
So we had a new CEO last year who has really injected some great pace into the organisation. And what is great when a new CEO comes along, from my perspective, is one of the first things they want to do. They want to get to know employees, but they also want to undertake strategy refresh. So it's a great opportunity, and it allowed us to inject into that sustainability angle right from the very start. So and for me, and we've touched on some examples that we have at Nationwide, ESG is actually embedded into our business in a heck of a lot of things that we do on a day-to-day basis, and I pretty much hope it kind of should be. So the conversations we had during the strategy refresh about supporting first-time buyers, or maintaining the size of our branch network, are all key factors where you have that lovely Venn diagram, a lot of overlap between strategy and sustainability. So that's something for me, James, that's going really, really well. What I think is a really hard thing, I talked at the beginning about us lending to homeowners in the UK. So we are the second largest mortgage provider in the UK. We want to support our members to make that transition, to make the climate transition, to support them with low cost financing when they want to make changes to their homes that will improve the energy efficiency. At the moment, we really aren't seeing a demand for that, and that is a big challenge for us as to how we help our members, how we educate them, how we get the right products out there, but they support them at the right time in relation to that.
Fantastic. As you mentioned there, a lot of the work we've done together over the last few years has focused on the E of ESG, and I know for that that's it's really grown as an issue for us, and it's something that is increasingly important. Lots of the discussion we've had around those long-term targets around net zero and environmental standards and the strategy that's being needed to deliver them. So how do you balance that long-term targets around net zero with sort of delivering on promises to customers in the short term?
Well, I mean, you're right. It is a long term. 2050. I think the thing I'd say is we can't wait to 2050. We can't pass it on to the management after us. We've got to focus on things that we can do today. And I always think of this in terms of make change where you can. So without getting into kind of complexities, focus on your scope 1 and 2, which are things like in your business, how it's fueled, so whether it's gas or electricity, where you get your electricity from. Is it green, so solar panels or wind farms, or is it not? You can make those direct changes to your business. So focus on things that you can do. Some of the things that you don't know how to do. So for us, I talked about mortgages. Think about test and learns, and don't be afraid for things to fail and innovate. So we really see Oakfield as a test and learn. For us to try and inspire people in the industry, we actually tried another test and learn about a year ago, which is solar panels, which is nationwide going into a new and different market. And that was great learnings, but we actually said, look, we can't scale this. So we tested and learned, and if you like, failed in the solar respect, but we've got some great learnings for other things, and don't be afraid to do that. I do think climate is actually something quite interesting as well, where the partnerships that are built in this space are very, very different to partnerships that we've just traditionally used to. So, don't be afraid to partner with competitors in this space to engage customers or kind of lobby the government, because I think it is a dual responsibility in relation to this as well. And there's always a lot of scrutiny when it comes to ESG, and I think that's probably really relevant for this group today, whether it's commentators, whether it's investors and rating agencies. And we get lots of scrutiny, which we positively welcome, about our ESG credentials. Now, we are in a very good position, so we're rated AAA by one of the ESG rating agencies and far and above our peers. But we listen and we learn to a number of commentators to help us work out, in addition to what our members are saying, where we need to play and what we need to do. So yeah, there's some things, James, that I think are really difficult and really long term, but actually, excuse me, there's a bunch of things to kind of face into in the near term that definitely are in our control.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've sort of covered is good governance and transparency. How are we embedding that good governance around our ESG work and some of those long-term targets, so that we don't have blind spots and we are doing things in the right way, and those proper processes are in place?
So it's really interesting. So we set science-based targets. When do we set about 4 or 5 months ago, and we went publicly with those. And actually, we said we didn't think we could achieve some of the 2030 targets in there. We just felt that there wasn't enough traction in the UK housing market. The government policy wasn't clear enough. We weren't seeing a demand or change in customer behaviour. And it was actually really important to us to be transparent and honest as to what we can and can't achieve. So I see so much greenwashing in the industry, whether it's, I know the ASA should be pushing this, but whether it's advertising, whether it's in disclosures, or any other things. And I think Nationwide should be leading the way when it comes to transparency in that. And James, you're right, in terms of governance, our board pushed us very hard to make sure that we kind of kept to our ESG credentials. We, from a governance perspective, we were pushed hard to be open and transparent in relation to that, and we went through quite a rigorous risk assessment as we went through that target setting and disclosure process.
Yeah, and just thinking about some of those processes, I know that there's risks from climate change in particular. So everything from potentially declining asset values through to the reputational risk and greenwashing you mentioned is something we spend a lot of time thinking about. So how does Nationwide go about managing some of those risks and making sure they've got the right processes in place?
So if you want to buy a house, you will go talk to your broker or go talk to your building society or bank and try and get out a mortgage. You'll apply for a mortgage. Now you'll typically get what's called a decision in principle that says in principle you can borrow this. At that point in time, Nationwide will be looking at your credit. So have you been paying off your credit card bills and whatever else? But they'll also be looking at the property that you're looking to buy and saying, well, what does this property look like in terms of flood risk or subsidence? And flood risk may be from surface water, so kind of rain. It may be from rivers. It may be from erosion from the sea. So we bring those climate factors into the here and now. And actually, the way that we look at that is we may not necessarily look at the risk of flooding today, but we will try and roll that forwards 30 or 50 years, because the whole dynamics of flood risks do change over that period of time. So that's a very kind of here and now part, and that's what we call physical risk when it comes to mortgages. When it comes to longer term risk, we're very focused on the transition, and for us, being a building society owned by our members, supporting them, we're very focused on a just transition. So making sure that people, when they retrofit their homes or any kind of policy that comes in, is done in a fair way that doesn't discriminate against certain sectors of society, whatever that may be. So we've been lobbying the government to try and support a just transition, particularly in the UK, where we have quite different house prices between different regions in the UK. So, if you spent £10,000, James, in a property in London, that may not be a lot to kind of put some solar panels on or I don't know, do some double glazing. But if you did that in Blackpool, where the average house price is 140,000, it's a heck of a lot of money in terms of the overall house price. So that's how we try to think about how we can get fairness into this, and that's one of the key parts of our lobbying strategy that we have with the government.
And finally, so based on your experience at Nationwide, what are your sort of top tips for comms professionals in this session today to ensure we're playing an effective role both in driving ESG concerns within our organisations, but also then talking externally effectively about what those organisations are doing?
So I'm not an expert on this, so I think take this as a guide rather than hard written. But I think your external insights and engagement are invaluable in this process. That the contacts that you have, that the kind of Rolodex, whether it's UK government, whether it's NGOs, whether it's actually some of the competitors as well, whether it's task force that are being set up by the government, are really important to kind of drive this. So that would be number one. And I do think it's not, when it comes to this, it's always not the traditional conversations or traditional people that you go to for some of this, but they will probably be a helpful start point. I think there's something around, I guess second point would be, don't push too hard to send a bold message on these, and remember kind of the downsides from the risk of things like greenwashing as well. There's a lot of people in this space trying to grab a headline but without the substance, and that I think is just genuinely really unhelpful. It's about how we can work together to focus on the solutions rather than rather than headline grabbing problems, I think. And I guess final point would be, and we certainly tried to do this with green homes, which is why I emphasize this so much in the topic today, is find an issue that you can legitimately own. You know, it's something that you can really grab hold of, that you're an authority on, that people want to talk to you about and seek you out as your name gets more and more recognition. It just becomes a natural extension of the work that you do on a day-to-day basis in your business. So yeah, that's probably where I'd land, James, for those.
That's great. Thanks, Graham, and hopefully that's given everyone a bit of an insight into how we think about ESG at Nationwide, and some of the practical steps we've taken certainly over the last few years to try and sort of live that and embed it within our organisation's social purpose.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. Thank you, Graham. Graham, there is actually a question for you in the chat, and it's a really good question from Rebecca. Have you found that the cost of living crisis has been affecting or limiting your ESG activity? For example, individuals and businesses are less likely to be able to spend money on things such as environmental and sustainable solutions, as they are often quite expensive, and that money is going on bills and wages.
That's a really interesting question. So, and thanks, Rebecca, for that. So I think there's a couple of parts of that. One, I think the E has, you know, it's been drowned out a bit by the cost of living, and I see the cost of living as the S. Now, I'm really interested to read everything that's come out from the government today about about various things in relation to green. So let's see if that ups the ante or not. I don't know. But I think there is a little bit of a reality of the cost of living drowning some of the stuff out. But what I would say is energy security, the cost of energy, you know, is there, and it is on people's mind. Now, what has also been at the forefront, and I talked a lot about the E today, what has been at the forefront of our minds is the social aspects. And from a cost of living perspective, we have also focused on supporting our members. So a really good example would be, I guess 4 to 6 weeks ago, Nationwide announced that we will give our members money back on their supermarket shopping. And that is something unique. That is actually quite a heck of a big sum for Nationwide to give away, but it's a cost of living thing that we felt was right for our membership. And that's us kind of going through that social, the S lens from that perspective. I mean, the wonderful thing is when you can get E and S to really overlap. And if you can get something whereby, you know, someone who puts in loft insulation that didn't have it before, or puts in draft excludes their home, that doesn't cost a lot, makes their home, you know, makes the home more environmentally friendly, and will save people money in respect of their heating. And that kind of E and S overlap is brilliant when you can get it, but isn't always there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Graham. I've got a question actually. It's interesting to hear that you said you're going to be the largest branch network in the UK when, as you say, other banks are closing. It's a long time since I walked into a bank to do anything. So how do you manage that with your carbon footprint as well? How are you managing your own emissions and your targets around that?
Yeah, okay. So my quote of largest branch network was me quoting an article rather than us doing the numbers. I feel I should caveat that before James actually kicks me under the table, but I know we'll be doing the numbers in the background anyway. But in terms of our branch network, it's a really good question, because anywhere that you've got a physical footprint is a carbon footprint in all reality. And we are very focused on that. So we have been taking out gas boilers from our branches and putting in, basically turning them to electric. And what Nationwide has done for a number of years is we have power purchase agreements in place. We've purchased our energy to be essentially solar powered. So we have a long-standing agreement that we've to provide green power to our branches and admin sites. And as we refurb our branches, which we do generally on a cycle of, I don't know, it depends where it's kind of paint or something broader, but probably every 3 to 5 years, we make other changes that make them more sustainable around insulation, around kind of lights and timers and various things like that as we go through that refurb project. But the boiler one was our big one, and that's what we've been very keen and excited to do.
Brilliant, thank you. And obviously do put any questions in the chat, even for the rest of the panel, not just even for Graham. The other thing I just wanted to ask you about, because it just seems to come up so much. You mentioned greenwashing, and obviously banks are interesting. We've seen, as you mentioned, the ASA and what happened with HSBC, BNP Paribas, global bank being sued for still, lending money to fossil fuel companies. I think this transition is fascinating, and I think the banking and the finance sector is a fascinating part of where we need to get to. How do you do that due diligence as an organization to make sure that you are lending to the right people, which is in line with your ESG narrative and claims? I assume that's part of your good governance.
It is, yes, yeah, and we are very fortunate. So we are retail focused. So we don't, so our predominant asset class is mortgages for us. So, and we have a skew towards first-time buyers, and we have a skew towards things as well, like social housing. So for us, it's our business model means it isn't that much of a challenge from that perspective. But I do recognise your point, and I think if you go, talk to other organisations, that is something they are grappling with, and they fundamentally got to reshape their business model and reshape some of the DNA that kind of has driven some of the decisions that they've had over the past 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and that is a journey they're on. I do think, and it's probably not often that I will call out our peers and support them, but what I will say is everyone is on a transition with this, and I do think going from zero to hero is unrealistic, whichever organisation you are. And I think what we should applaud people for is steps that they are making forward. We just need to challenge people to make sure that those kind of steps are at the right pace.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good point. That's a really good point, Graham. Thanks. We've got another question in the chat, which is a really interesting one. Can you tell us about your employee communications in terms of ESG? How do you make sure your people understand the commitments that you've made?
Okay, really interesting. So Nationwide has about 18,000 employees. And we have a number of employee networks, so things around working family, pride networks, gender equality, etc. We also have a green employee network, and that was the last employee network to be set up, and is now the biggest employee network with 4,000 members. And it genuinely staggers me how large it has got to. That is run by some volunteers, some volunteer co-chairs, people who are really passionate about the subject, what we try and do through that network is to provide people with nudges, to provide people with examples of things that they can do. So for instance, there are podcasts on there for someone who is going through an air source heat pump integration at the moment, so you can kind of learn from real life what are the ups and downs in this, rather than just getting the happy kind of view or the really negative view from the newspapers. So we use our Green Employee Network quite a bit to help people do nudges. I talked about strategy and sustainability, and in terms of communicating our strategy, well, a lot of it is embedded within that, and I'm really keen that ESG is seen as part of an embedded part of the business rather than on the side. That's incredibly important. And just picking up on the point around commitments, so we have a number of what we call mutual good commitments, so things that Nationwide commits to our members and society, and kind of vice versa as well. And we disclose those externally, we track ourselves against them, we report against them. They're done to our employees and as I say, externally as well. And I think it's quite important that people can see that we're hold ourselves to account against some of the key ESG facets of the business.
Brilliant. Thank you, Graham. Anyone else, Deborah or James, have you got any other questions that you'd like to pose, or if anyone else has any questions for Deborah or James?
I think there are a few more questions in the chat, Susie,
that I've missed,
that are specific actually to the nationwide story that we're sharing today. So this first one is from an anonymous attendee, but says, from a comms perspective, how have you set up the comms and ESG teams in Nationwide? What roles and how did it come about? So that might be a question for both James and Graham to comment on.
Shall I take that one?
Yeah.
So broadly, we've taken the remit for ESG comms into the existing comms team and sort of added it to the portfolio of things that each of those comms people deals with. So, you know, my role has traditionally been in the policy and public affairs team, working on our housing issues. So lots of those green home issues and some of the other ESG issues as they arise. In the same way, I've got a media colleague that I work closely with who has picked those up. Graham's team has sort of, again, adapted a little bit to take in the sustainability team, and then we have other colleagues that work on issues like diversity and equality, and we coordinate that work on an issue basis across those different teams. Probably in the same way we would say something on mortgages, there will be someone from the policy and public affairs team, someone from external comms, someone from internal comms, and we will communicate those issues as they arise and as we need to.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. That's a really good question. And the other one, what have been your biggest challenges from a communications perspective with telling your ESG story?
I think sort of Graham referred to it sort of briefly. It's the sort of extra sensitivity in this area around, you know, the risk of things going wrong and things like, you know, pushing things too far that you end up in the greenwashing space. I think it's how you have to learn how we talk about ESG issues in a sensible way, the one that doesn't push them too far, and really making sure that where we talk about some of those ESG issues, there's real backup from the organisation in terms of, you know, practical steps we're taking or products and propositions we're delivering. So we can say, you know, we think there needs to be, say, more air source heat pumps installed in homes, and we can say that because at the Oakfield development site we've gone for air source heat pumps rather than gas boilers. We've got the green financing products in place so that if you want to get a further advance on your mortgage to do some of that work or install insulation, install an air source heat pump, you know, we can provide the funding to do that. So it's not pushing too far and having the practical delivery for, you know, as a business to back up some of those claims.
Okay, brilliant. Excellent. That's great. I think you're right. And I think what you said earlier, Graham, was, you know, find a space, find something that you can own as an organization. And I think that really is something which I'm always mindful of when I'm talking to clients about communications and ESG. If, you know, your authentic communications in this space are authentic because you have proper proof points and proper case studies, and it is genuinely part of your business strategy. You know, your ESG is not over here and your business strategy is over there. I think it, you know, if it's very clear to people when that happens, and I think it's really important that they're one and the same thing, and that, you know, you're able to communicate that in a confident way. So I think that's really important, and it sounds like you're managing that well at Nationwide.
We try our best, but you know, we are well supported by our business model, which helps us with a lot of these. So we, yes, that's a very good starting base.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's really great. Deborah.
I just make a few comments to echo that. I think there is a danger that some people feel that their company ought to be communicating about ESG because it's good for the brand. And actually, that's probably one of the poorest reasons for doing so. It's really important that the purpose of a company is what is brought to life. And that is recognised then through the way in which you understand what the E, S and G risks are for that business, which is where I think communications professionals need to work, as we've just heard today, hand in hand with the business strategy, the people who are responsible for the commercial success of the business. You have to partner in this space together to understand where your impacts are. And, you know, in technical terms, that's called the materiality assessment, which then leads you to understand, well, if this is where our impacts are, how do we as a business need to manage that? Because it's good business to do so, but also because commercially you want to assure the future of your business. And that's something we very much took to heart at Puma Energy. It's a very different kind of company. Firstly, it's a fossil fuel company, you might say, oil and gas, but it's providing energy solutions to people who have very poor access to energy in markets in Africa, in Latin America, in Papua New Guinea. I mean, if I tell you that we have one retail station, which is a pump in the highlands in Papua New Guinea that people need to get access to, you know, travel their trucks and farm equipment around, you kind of understand the different dynamics. When we also had markets in Puerto Rico and South Africa, which are very mature. So those countries are going to go through a very different energy transition from the kind of transition we're going to go through. So we were very clear that our purpose was to energize communities, bringing safe and secure and high quality fuels and oil products to those markets. So whether that's LPG for cooking, when you think there's 1.3 billion people in Africa with no access to electricity, then the place for us to start there in terms of our own risks and also the benefits we bring to society was, how do we help those markets transition? So it was solar panels. Firstly, solarizing our own assets. Secondly, commercializing those solutions with other commercial B2B customers. And then starting to think about how we might bring that to communities in microgrids, as well as continuing to provide people with access to LPG so they weren't cooking on coal stoves and burning dirty fuels in their houses and harming their health. So it's those things, through to also new frontiers like sustainable aviation fuel and helping airline businesses understand how they would manage that transition. So we built our commitments very much aligned with the UN SDGs, then did a materiality assessment. We integrated this very much in the reporting and management of the business, setting up an ESG committee at board level, but also an ESG network around the business, pretty much like I think Graham and James were describing in terms of how you involve and engage your employees in this, who see themselves very much as part of those communities. And then we were able, I think, to start to make some progress, you know, gaining, you know, what is for an oil midstream downstream company, a pretty good assessment of a B- from CDP. So I think you have to recognize that people are in different places, communities, societies are in different places, and the challenges are basically fundamental, but maybe expressed in quite different ways. You have to adapt to that accordingly. And on the comms front, and in terms of how we organise and talk about it, because our purpose and our mission was so clear, it was very much integrated into the day-to-day of how we spoke and engaged about our business, both internally and externally, with our stakeholders and investors.
That's
helpful.
It is helpful. That's a brilliant example, because that really gives that global view of the challenges that we are facing, and the transition is not the same. And we, you know, we're often in danger of having quite a Western-centric view of what ESG means when actually it's going to play out quite differently across the world. So that's great. Thank you for that. We've come to the end of our time. Thank you so much for joining us today, and apologies about the technical hitch at the beginning. But it's been great listening to you, Graham, about how you're actually embedding this within your organisation, and thank you for your time today to share that with us. Our next event is actually on the 20th of April. And in that event, we're actually going to address what's coming down the line for us all as communicators in our organizations dealing with ESG. And so some of that will be around the regulatory environment, what will organizations have to comply with, have to report on, and how that's going to challenge our communications and how we need to upskill and equip ourselves as communicators. So that will be a really interesting one to dive into a bit more of that detail. So please do join us about the next sessions to come. Do look out for information on the ESG webpage on the CIPR website and CPD by tomorrow. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Deborah and James and Graham. It's been really great listening to you.
Thank you, Susie.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.
That was great. Well done, everyone.
Oh, that's never happened to me before.
A PowerPoint is
What,
so.
people saying it was great.
PowerPoint has this thing where you can
I just switched from Teams.
You can be in speaker view, and then you're actually looking on your screen, but what it's showing is something else. And it's a nightmare. That's why I said, show it as a PDF.
I know,
you never get those problems.
You're right.
It's been really strange for me as well. I've got a couple of screens here, and it just, I don't know, that seemed to complicate it even further. But yeah, we did a good job anyway. You know, I'm sure people are very interested in the content. So well done team.
Thank you.
And we'll get on top of it for the next one.
Yeah. As in, I won't be sharing the slides. I'll make Jihan do it.
Oh, I just think it's one of those technical gremlins, you know, switching between apps and then switching between what you're seeing and what you're displaying, especially if you're on dual screens.
I know. I was doing this yesterday. Fortunately, it was a live presentation, so I could look at my screen and then I could look behind me at the screen everyone else could see. I was therefore on top of it. That was easy.
Oh, what a pain. But yeah, good. And
just one screen is a problem.
No, it was really good. And Graham sounds like he knows his stuff, James. So that must be nice to work with.
Yeah,
he's really good and really knowledgeable on this issue. Yeah.
And very considered, you know, very balanced. I thought it was really great for me to have somebody from the business in the room who's talking about this, understanding the position that most communicators could come from as well. Thought that was a really important element of how he approached the conversation with us. So it was really, it felt to me a real role model of business partnering. Yeah. So it was great. Thank him so much.
Yeah. Drop him an email actually and say thank you.